So that's it then. He's gone. Ncuti Gatwa is no longer the Doctor. 18 months in TV terms he appeared on the screen as the 15th Doctor, and then, not enormously surprising, I think as Doctor Who fans we have seen the way the wind has been blowing over the last few weeks. And if you're online, I try not to go online looking at too much Doctor Who fandom because it can be a very disturbing place. There have been rumours bubbling for quite a while now that Ncuti will be leaving at the end of the second series. And lo and behold, it happened at the end of last Saturday's episode, The Reality War. So what I want to do today is just look back at his Mayfly period in Doctor Who and consider what he brought to the show and what the show gave to him as an actor and what it allowed him to do on screen and what legacy he will leave Doctor Who going forward. And as we know, Doctor Who's future is uncertain at the moment, but what mark he's left on Doctor Who's history and how people will remember him in years to come. Let's talk Ncuti Gatwa. Hello, welcome back. My name is Paul Mann. Just a briefish talk about Ncuti Gatwa's tenure in Doctor Who. Now, in the past, when I've talked about previous Doctors, and I think during the anniversary, like most people, I did my Doctor Who rankings, my favourite Doctors ranked in order. And I've always said that to do that, I have to consider not just the actor and his or her performance in the role, but also their era in the show. And this is obviously something which is out of their hands as actors. The stories that they had, the myth that was created and that grew around the character and the series during their time in the show, and how enjoyable the stories were and how inventive and just generally how good they were. In discussing any Doctor, for me, it is all about the whole package. Them as an actor, their performance, the way they looked, the way they carried themselves, and everything that happened to them. However, perversely, I'm going to set that aside for this video, and I'm going to talk about Ncuti Gatwa as an actor, as a performer, how he carried himself on the show, how he looked, how he behaved, what he brought to the character of the Doctor. I'm not going to look so much at the individual stories, such as they are, because I think that's been done to death, and I may well do a video about his era creatively at some point. But now that he's sort of in the rearview mirror and he's left the TARDIS, apparently in the capable hands of Billy Piper, yeah, right, I think it's time to look back at him and what he did in the very short time he was on board the show. It was actually 3 years ago, May 2022, at the TV BAFTA Awards, I think, that it was announced that Ncuti had been cast to play the 15th Doctor, taking over from David Tennant's 14th Doctor, who at that point had only just filmed his anniversary specials that were still at that point 18 months away from being screened. It all seems like a very long time ago. It also seems like yesterday. It's very odd. The recent history of Doctor Who is a very strange thing. I'd never heard of Ncuti at that point. I'd heard of the show Sex Education that had sort of made him quite well known amongst a young audience, but I'd never watched it and I hadn't heard of him. And I can understand that the casting of this young, enthusiastic actor who had a very devoted following in a cult show, and I can understand Russell T Davies and the BBC and Disney, who were on board as financiers of the show and distributors of the show at the time, believing that he would bring that momentum of his career forward into Doctor Who. Doctor Who is a very particular thing, however, as we will discuss. It doesn't play by normal rules in terms of who's cast as the Doctor. You may cast somebody who's red hot, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be red hot in Doctor Who, because Doctor Who is a show, although it can be very popular, it's also quite niche, and 8 million people watching in one show aren't necessarily going to follow you to Doctor Who. They don't like science fiction or fantasy or monsters or kids' TV, as it's often seen to be. So I didn't know Ncuti, I wasn't aware of him, and my first sight of him was those press call conferences with him and Russell T Davies at BAFTA. What we had here then was the first black, openly gay actor playing the Doctor. And that in itself was a bit of a leap for many dyed-in-the-wool fans. The Doctor Who fans, certainly older ones, are traditionalists, and they like Doctor Who to be a certain thing. And anything that deviates from that, they They don't want it, they can't cope with it, they won't accept it. And I think we had this with Jodie Whittaker, the first female Doctor. There was a very vocal portion of Doctor Who fandom that would not tolerate this, would not accept it, and they would not shut up about it for the entire 4 years or so that she was in the title role. Constantly on YouTube, constantly on social media, these horrible memes with goggly eyes and insulting nicknames that people gave her. They spoke about her in ways that they obviously wouldn't if they met her. If they met her, they would be, "Oh, Miss Whittaker, it's lovely to meet you." You know, they would not speak to anybody the way that they spoke to Jodie Whittaker when she was in Doctor Who. And I think, from what I've seen, much the same has happened in relation to Ncuti Gatwa. There was a lot of really nasty stuff about him, about his gender, about his race. I mean, all these things that you really wish weren't still out there, but they are still out there, unfortunately. I think that this country still has very strong problems in relation to the acceptance of race and gender and so on. And I think Ncuti felt the backdraft of that. Whether he felt it personally, whether he was shielded from it, I think he was probably shielded from it. And it is interesting that on the Unleashed programme, on press releases and so on, since the last episode, he has been saying, "I felt embraced and I felt loved and part of this Doctor Who family." And I hope that is true. I hope he does feel some affection from the people who watched him. I hope he wasn't exposed to too much of the intolerance and the bile that these creatures have spat out in his direction, which is inexcusable and unacceptable. And if people have issues with an individual's look, just go away. Don't watch the things that they do. Don't involve yourself. Stay in your safe space, if that's where they think it is. But it was obvious, I think, as soon as he appeared, that this was all going to happen. Beyond all that, looking at his time in Doctor Who, he actually only appeared in 19 episodes in total. Some of that was the last few minutes of David Tennant's final special, The Giggle. Due to filming problems with Sex Education, he made little more than cameo appearances in 2 episodes of his first season, and even in the current or most recent season, he was missing from a lot of episode 4. So really, we've had about 15 episodes with a substantial screen presence for Ncuti Gatwa. And as I said, what is so odd, watching all the behind-the-scenes stuff, which we're seeing if you watch Doctor Who Unleashed, all the bits that appear on YouTube, these 2 seasons were made very close to one another. They weren't filmed back-to-back. Season 1 was done, then I think there was a break for a few weeks, then season 2. So, as near as damn it, back-to-back. And watching Unleashed, it seems that Ncuti was filming his last scenes as his first season was being screened. We will probably never know the real truth about what was planned for Ncuti in Doctor Who. Certainly, when he was on the Graham Norton show at Christmas, promoting the Christmas special, Joy to the World, he was heard to say by people who were in the audience, "I'm looking forward to filming season 3 next year." That was cut out of the broadcast version of the show. And I think we all know the reason why now. Things changed. I mean, again, this is all stuff that we don't know. I dare say it will come out at some point. Probably not officially. Things will leak and people will find things out. But I think what people seem to agree has probably happened is that he was hoping to do a 3rd season after a short break. He did his 2 seasons. Then he did a stage play in London and he filmed The Roses with Olivia Colman and Benedict Cumberbatch, which is coming up this summer. These were obviously done after Doctor Who Season 2 was filmed. And I think his expectation probably was that he would come back this year, early this year, to film Season 3. But of course that hasn't happened for various reasons. Now we don't know what's happened with Disney, we don't know what's happening with the BBC. But I think there are a number of issues at play. Disney have been dragging their heels about whether they want any more, and I suspect they don't. BBC have been wondering about financing, and if they can. An important issue is the fact that whatever you think of his performance, and I will get to that eventually, it's not been a successful era in terms of audiences. That's something that the BBC and possibly Disney, if they still have any dog in the race, is that the show lost a fair chunk of its audience under his tenure. Again, I don't know if that's for reasons that we wish weren't there, or it's just that people didn't like the show anymore, lost interest in the show. This is a show now that's been back for 20 years. No series runs that long, and any series that does is going to find its audience dipping, especially a show like Doctor Who, which depends on a churn of younger people coming in and older people moving away and a core of people who stay with it. Doctor Who hasn't attracted a younger audience, and I think that an audience that wouldn't necessarily watch science fiction, who watched it because it was new and it had sexy David Tennant in it and then the slightly sexy Matt Smith, they moved away as the format of the show changed. Peter Capaldi came along, not an obvious eye candy casting, and I think that all fed into people just wandering off from the show, getting a bit bored with it. Perhaps it was starting to get a bit repetitious. Certainly under Stephen Moffat, it was starting to get a bit obscure and less exciting, and I just think the audience filtered away. The audience came back a bit for David Tennant, of course, as they would, and then Ncuti Gatwa's Christmas special, The Church on Ruby Road, introduced him properly, and that got about 7.5 million viewers. It was a good start. But when the show came back in May for season 1, that figure had about halved to about 4 million. And it sort of stayed that way. And in this season, it's dropped even more to about 3 million. Certainly for the BBC, they must have looked at this and thought, well, Ncuti Gatwa is not connecting with people as the Doctor. People aren't liking his interpretation of the Doctor. For whatever reason, they're not watching the show anymore. And that must have played a part in why he isn't back for Series 3. Now, certainly as a up-and-coming actor, the delay in filming New Doctor Who, I'm sure must have led to him thinking, well, I can't hang around. There are other jobs coming my way. I can't just sit and wait on the off chance that Doctor Who goes back into production. And again, this is all spitballing. I'm just speculating. I'm picking up bits and pieces from here and there and just working out my own hypotheses. I think it's quite likely that the BBC released him from his contract when he expressed an interest in being released from it so he could seek other work, with no particular immediate sign of Doctor Who coming back. And the BBC, looking at the figures and the response to him and the way he had gone down with the general public, must have thought, well, we'll cut our losses here and Ncuti can go. I know Ncuti has been saying, and the narrative is now, that it was always a 2-year plan. It was always a 2-year plan. That's pinch of salt stuff. I think that's convenient retconning. I don't ever think that was the case. But it's the sort of thing that they can work with now on the basis of the way that Ncuti's 2-season arc played out. So after going through all that, 14 minutes in, let's talk about what he brought to the series. I think what he brought to it is an incredible amount of charisma, energy, humour, devilish good looks. It's a curse some of us have to put up with. Clearly, sort of a fashion icon, and again, that's something I'll come back to. I've mentioned this before. He had it all in so many ways. What he didn't have until I think this season was the essence of what the Doctor is. I never felt, so I didn't feel until episodes in this season, that he was suddenly latching on to what the Doctor is. There is something indefinable about the Doctor, so I'm going to try and define it. Here's this alien, here's this godlike figure from an alien race who travels through time and space, righting wrongs and defeating maniacs and alien races that seek to dominate and subjugate other species. That's what the Doctor does. He's a huge intergalactic policeman, if you like. Travels around the place, putting things right and seeing off the bad guys. And it's only in season 2 that I felt we were getting there with him, because I think in season 1 there was a sort of flippancy about him, and I described it recently as not Ncuti Gatwa playing the Doctor, but Ncuti Gatwa playing the Doctor. I felt there was more of Ncuti Gatwa than there was of the Doctor, and I accept that there was certainly a culture shock in that first season to see the Doctor, who traditionally is worn, if not costumes, having a look to the way he dressed, and there was often a sort of an Edwardian flavour of that, with smoking jackets and capes, scarves, check trousers. Even Peter Davison in his cricketer era was sort of like an Edwardian cricketer type look about him, and they've all had that sort of costume look. Even the modern Doctors, I know that they moved away from having costumes, but you had Christopher Eccleston with his leather jacket, and his Doc Martens and t-shirts, very plain, straightforward look. Then David Tennant, natty in his pinstripe suits, blue or brown, and have a defined look that he had. Peter Capaldi with this thing that started off as a nod to John Pertwee and then becoming a desperate attempt to appeal to youngsters by wearing hoodies and scruffy clothes and tops and playing the guitar. Disastrous. And Jodie Whittaker's very costume look. So there's always been an image that the Doctor's had. But Ncuti never had that. And as I've said in previous videos, that was one of the issues I had, that there was never a recognisable Doctor silhouette for him. I can see why they would do it, because he's a clothes source and he can wear anything. And some of the clothes that I've seen him wearing in photo shoots, some of the stuff he's worn in Doctor Who, kilts, Regency clothes in some episodes, sometimes just a pair of jeans and a white t-shirt, leather jacket. He can wear anything and get away with it. And I can understand from the position of a costume designer working on a show, why would you want to put somebody who can wear anything into a defined look, a coat, pair of trousers, a shirt, the same thing week after week. So I think that, although that's something I've criticised in the past, I think they could have made an effort to have a vaguely costume look. There was, again, I'm going to repeat something I've said time and again, when you saw him wearing that long leather jacket occasionally and check trousers, that was something they could have worked with and added to. But he would wear different clothes in different episodes. But he got away with it because he can get away with it. He's the sort of actor who shines in different clothes, and although as an ordinary bloke who wears a t-shirt and jeans most of the times, some of his clothes seemed outrageous and extreme to me, but he can get away with them because he's Ncuti Gatwa and he's got that look and that style about him. And that's what he brought to Doctor Who. He brought that very distinctive look of this man who could wear anything, and so did. There's been a lot of talk as well about him and his emotions. Ncuti cries in every episode. Funny enough, he didn't cry in too many of this season's episodes. And again, that was something where, as a diehard fan, I sort of thought, well, I think it's good to see the Doctor in touch with his emotions and reacting and responding to emotional situations and things that happen. But when he's in tears all the time, it sort of lessened it and it made it feel a bit less impactful, because he's reacting that way to lots of things rather than huge things happening that would affect the Doctor. Because don't forget, the Doctor is 900 years old. He's been through a lot in his lifetimes. He's experienced a lot. He's experienced loss. He's experienced massive catastrophes and chaos. He's lost his home planet. He's lost his people. He's lost friends. He's seen empires rise and fall. But he's never really cried before. But now he's gone. You can look back at this 2-season arc, and Russell T Davies has sort of said in broad terms that they wanted to expose that emotional side of the Doctor, the raw side of the Doctor who does feel things on a level that he hasn't previously. And again, this is something that we saw in the last episode where Jodie Whittaker's Doctor returned, and there was that exchange between them where Jodie Whittaker's Doctor was startled by the emotional reactions that Ncuti's Doctor was showing. That worked in the end. It took a while to get there because we're not used to that from the Doctor. We're used to the Doctor striding through situations, certainly in classic Doctor Who, and just resolving them and then moving on. The modern series has touched a bit more on the Doctor's emotions, but not in that visual, tearful sort of way. Now, looking back over these 2 seasons, if we work as we have to make them feel like a whole story, which they don't, because there are loose ends all over the place, there are lots of things that don't make sense, that weren't explained. But if, as we must now, look at this as an era, I can see what they were going for in having the Doctor emote in this way and appearing to be in touch with his emotions. Not necessarily something I want to see repeated again and again, not an experiment that we need to go back to, but it's been done, and I think Ncuti is a good enough actor to carry it off and make it convincing, even though it did become a bit of a meme, certainly after his first series, where he couldn't seem to open the TARDIS door without blubbing. Which brings me, I suppose, to Ncuti's general performance as the Doctor. Now, as I said, it took me a little while to get the groove he was into as the Doctor, but certainly towards the end of the first season, certainly through this season, I have felt that he is the Doctor. And yes, there are elements of his performance that don't fit into my perception of the Doctor. And because Ncuti's a gay man, he has that effervescence about him, that larger-than-life expressiveness about him. And the way he speaks, whether that's in the script or not, calling people hun and babes and Yaz Queen in Robot Revolution, which is apparently a gay community greeting or something. That's all there, and that's, as somebody who's watched Doctor Who since the 60s and is not used to this sort of culture being part of the makeup of Doctor Who, it sort of jolts you out of it a bit. And of course we had the Doctor expressly defined as gay in Rogue, where he had this slightly unlikely relationship with a character he'd only met 5 minutes before. But that's clearly been a theme of the show, that we have a gay Doctor, although oddly enough the last couple of episodes have hinged on the concept of the Doctor being married and having a child. So it's quite odd to counterpoint that with the quite clearly gay essence of the Doctor that was being expressed throughout the rest of his time. As an actor, he really started to excel in this season. I think right from the beginning, in fact, from Robot Revolution, he started to feel more like the Doctor. Lux, he was much more like the Doctor. The Well, I think, for me, which I think is probably my favourite episode from his era, because it was a sequel to a great episode from the David Tennant era, and it was proper hard science fiction, and he really felt like the Doctor in that. Again, because there was a connection with Midnight. He remembered having been to this planet before. He remembered the previous struggle he'd had with this invisible entity. But he just felt more like the Doctor, and he's felt more and more like the Doctor as each episode's gone by. Even things like The Story and the Engine, which I wasn't hugely enamoured of. I felt that he was the Doctor, and I have felt it a lot this year. Which is why him leaving did have an impact. The Doctor regenerating is always a big thing in Doctor Who. It's certainly become a big thing in this era. Back in the old series, of course, it was sort of done with a quick sort of mixed fade sort of image thing. So it wasn't a big spectacle. It wasn't a big emotional thing underpinned by great blousy Murray Gold music as it is today, which really sort of makes you feel it. This is coming, this is big, this is emotional. And I think even with people like Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi that I wasn't connected to in ways I had been with Chris Eccleston and David Tennant, the Doctor regenerating is still a powerful thing. It's still a big thing dramatically for the series. And it's certainly played now as a big thing for the Doctor. It isn't just swapping his body. It has an impact on him psychologically, because he is effectively dying and being reborn, looking like somebody else and having to learn how to be that person. And I felt that Jodie Whittaker's finale was extremely powerful, and Ncuti's was equally powerful. And I really felt the emotion of him leaving, because he's there standing in the TARDIS. This has been a joy, and I feel that it's Ncuti saying that as much as the Doctor, because no matter what behind the scenes shenanigans have gone on, whether he's left because he was considered not very popular, whether he left because he couldn't hang around waiting for the show to come back, whether he was always supposed to be there for 2 years, I do not know. But in that last episode, for all its many, many faults, that last 20 minutes or so, I felt the age and experience and the passage of time of the Doctor. He got that old man in a young man's body thing, which is often said to be a symbol of what the Doctor is. And I really felt that in those last few minutes when he realised that he had to surrender his regeneration energy to find and save his daughter, who turned out not to be his daughter anyway, and knew that he would lose this face that he really liked. And I just felt in those last 20 minutes of the episode that there was an emotional connection with him and the character that really came out. And I did feel that when he regenerated, it was Ncuti Gatwa saying, this has been a joy. And I think he enjoyed it. I hope he enjoyed it. He will never be my Doctor, because I'm too old to have my Doctors. My Doctors will always be John Pertwee and David Tennant, Tom Baker. They're the ones who shine for me as the beacons of what the Doctor can be as a hero. I think that Ncuti Gatwa in the end was a pretty damn good Doctor. I think he did embody the Doctor, and that's what it's all about. You have to look at this person who's playing the Doctor, whether they're wearing a dress or a kilt or a scarf or a cricket jumper, no matter what they're wearing, whether they're wearing a costume or fancy clothes because they can. Does this person on screen, is he the Doctor? Do you believe in this person as the Doctor? And after a slow start, yes, I think this year I believed in Ncuti as the Doctor. I felt that he was the Doctor. He had the Doctor. He was there. He understood the Doctor. And it is sad to see him go. It's always sad to see a Doctor go. Especially when you think with Ncuti, now he's got it. I want to see a bit more of where else he can go with this. But it's not to be. It's not to be. He's moved on. I think my fear was when he was cast. Because yes, like everybody else, I have my doubts about would the show become too camp or too gay or too woke, to use those dreaded words. And I'm not even going to go down the woke hole because a lot of the people who say Doctor Who is woke, it's woke, don't know what woke actually means. And they're wrong anyway, because it isn't. It's just doing what Doctor Who's always done, is make points about the world we live in, and that's what proper science fiction does. It doesn't just tell fantasy stories. It reflects back at us where we are today and where we might go in the future if we don't change our ways, or where we might go if we do. So I'm ignoring all that sort of stuff, which is just a distraction and a lot of hogwash and a lot of noise that some sad people keep wailing on about. I think that Ncuti did a good job, and I think he will be missed, as indeed will Doctor Who, of course, because nothing's set in stone yet, nothing's been announced, but there's clearly not going to be any more Doctor Who for at least 2 years. Just yesterday, Andy Pryor, I'm going off slightly off topic here, Andy Pryor, the casting director who's worked on the show since 2005, he announced he's not working on it anymore. I don't know if he's retiring or moving on to other things. He's not working on it because there is no Doctor Who. My understanding still is the Doctor's going to have a lengthy break, longer than 2 years. Whatever happens, we're not going to see Billy as the Doctor. I do think that that was a red herring, just slotted into the episode for a big wow finale, for some headlines for the show as it shuffles off stage for a while. And I don't think we'll see her again. And I know there are people out there, because I've looked at some of the reactions, it's quite amusing. Oh, she'll be in the Christmas special. 100% there'll be Christmas special. Can't wait to see what costume she's going to wear. Of course, not everybody knows or is interested in what's going on behind the scenes. People just watch the show because they love it and they watch it and they don't pay attention to all the chatter about behind the scenes scandals or problems and so on. But there isn't going to be any Doctor Who for at least 2 years, and I think we probably all have to sort of settle ourselves to that, and I think probably a little bit longer than that too. But at the end of the day, it's gone out with a very good actor giving a very good performance. That will gain in reputation over the years. With the show off the air for a while, people will start looking back at some of these older episodes or recent episodes. Perhaps the subtext of it and the subtlety of it will suddenly become a bit more evident. We won't talk about the craziness of some of the writing because that's for another video. Ncuti as the Doctor will grow in stature as the show remains off air. Right, that's me done for this video. I would be very interested to hear your comments on Ncuti as the Doctor. I know this video has been a bit, way back and forth, but I didn't particularly want to necessarily single out particular moments. There are several where you go, that's the Doctor. Oh yes, that's the Doctor. And he did have a few of those. But I'd be very interested to hear what your thoughts were of Ncuti's time in the role. I don't really want to hear he was crap, too woke, too gay. Not interested in that. So if you do post that, it just won't hang around. So constructive comments as ever. I'm very pleased that most of the comments I had about the reality war last weekend were constructive and interesting rather than woke shit. So that's always nice that I'm not attracting the attention of that particular cabal of Doctor Who fans. So yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on Ncuti and your favourite moments perhaps from his time on the show and where you think he'll fit into the legacy of the show long term. Right, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you are new here. It'd be great to have you on board to the channel. Even though Doctor Who is going to be off the air, there's going to be lots of Doctor Who content, of course, because there's new Blu-ray sets and animations and retro episodes and things. So there'll always be Doctor Who content on here. Lots of stuff to come moving forward. So please stick around. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you soon. Till I do, keep taking the stuff.